I was a ghost, a blur of black vest and white button-down, and for the last 3 years, I had perfected the art of occupying space without registering. But now, standing inside the inner sanctum of Giosuè Cocci's fortified compound, I felt less like a waitress and more like a live wire, a single fatal short circuit waiting to happen. After my internal, reckless thought, non firmare quello, the commitment was made. My ghost life had just ended. I just hadn't told the rest of the world yet. The sanctum itself was engineered for secrecy, designed to contain billions of dollars worth of silence, soundproofed, windowless, and smelling faintly of mahogany polish and rare, expensive cigars. In the center, Giosuè sat at the head of a massive table, his appearance exactly as formidable as his reputation demanded. He was younger than I'd expected, his face a study in severe angles, his dark suit looking less like attire and more like armor. He was utterly still, absorbing the final presentations with a discipline I knew was far more dangerous than any outward show of temper. Giosuè Cocci was a man who moved only when certain, which meant my window of intervention was closing fast. My current assignment was the final one, serving a round of aged Sicilian digestivo, a ceremonial toast before the ink dried. I approached the table, my hand steady on the silver tray, masking the chaotic drumbeat of my pulse. The lawyer Giosuè trusted most, a man named Salvatore with a surprisingly soft voice and the cold, sharp eyes of a ledger accountant, began the closing summary. This was the key moment. As required by tradition for agreements between the 5 families, the final binding articles were to be read aloud in the dialect. "Per questa ragione," Salvatore murmured, translating a lengthy, dry-sounding Latin passage from the massive leather-bound document. "L'accordo definisce una serie di operazioni finanziarie comuni, specificamente una pratica standard di condotta aziendale in comune." That phrase hit me. It wasn't the Sicilian itself that alerted me. I could speak it flawlessly, a residue of my time undercover in Italy. It was the specific, weighted legal phrasing, pratica standard di condotta aziendale in comune. My mind, that terrifying, hyper-focused machine I'd kept locked away, snapped into high gear. It wasn't a phrase for a simple unification treaty. It was a Trojan horse. My photographic memory and 3 years of intensive study to evade prosecution instantly cross-referenced the phrase against every major federal statute I'd cataloged. My internal Rolodex of case law spun, clicking past hundreds of dry, dense pages of criminal codes and precedents. Ping. There it was. An immediate, undeniable match. U.S. vs. Castellano, 1985. The term was lifted almost verbatim from the definitive section of the RICO Act defining a pattern of racketeering activity. By signing a document that legally codified their joint criminal operations as a standard practice of common business conduct, Giosuè wouldn't be entering a peace agreement. He would be providing the key evidential element needed to establish the continuity of criminal purpose required for a successful RICO conviction. It wasn't a financial fraud after his money, like the story I'd read about. It was a self-incriminating legal trap aimed directly at his life and the total implosion of the Cocci empire. The document wasn't after his inheritance, it was after his freedom, his power, and the entire structure built over generations. I watched as Salvatore finished his summation, his smooth smile returning, and he extended the pen toward Giosuè. The signing portion of the document, the execution clause, lay exposed on the mahogany. He doesn't know. The lawyers know. They were selling him out not for a quick payout, but for a devastating long-term political victory that would take down every single member of the Cocci family. The internal conflict that had been my constant companion, survival versus purpose, now exploded into a terrifying clarity. If I spoke, I became the target. The powerful enemies from my past, the ones who had forced me into this ghost life, would find me as soon as I emerged from the shadows. But if I remained silent, The resulting chaos from Giosuè's imminent arrest, the inevitable mob war, the federal crackdown, the immediate exposure of his organization, would dissolve my protection and expose my identity anyway. My fragile anonymity would be destroyed either way. Only one way left a man alive, and the other left him imprisoned. Giosuè, disciplined to a fault, looked down at the document, his hand pausing over the signature line. This was the point of no return. My survival was tied to his. The choice was an illusion. The silver tip of the pen lowered, just millimeters above the pristine line. The room held its breath. I stepped slightly closer, using the sound of the chair scraping softly against the thick rug as cover. I opened my mouth, the flawless Sicilian rolling out, not as a desperate plea, but as a sudden tactical order, a command issued with the authority of absolute knowledge. I broke the silence, the uniform, and every rule I had sworn to uphold. I whispered, pitching my voice low enough to be audible only to the boss himself, yet sharp and cold enough to cut through the quiet. Non firmare quello, it is a trap. The seconds that followed my whispered command were the longest of my life. The air in the sanctum didn't just thicken, it froze. Giosuè Cocci did not flinch, did not roar, and did not drop the pen. His reaction was far more terrifying. He stopped moving. His arm, which had been descending, became a statue, halting its trajectory just millimeters from the signature line. The only outward sign of the bomb I had just dropped was the subtle, chilling shift in his eyes. They lifted from the document, passed over the lawyer's shoulder, and locked onto mine. In those dark, disciplined pools, I saw not anger, but a razor-sharp, lethal assessment. "Excuse me, Mr. Cocci," Salvatore, the smiling lawyer, interjected, trying to smooth over the interruption with practiced ease. The waitress must have misunderstood the conversation. She clearly doesn't speak the dialect fluently, or perhaps she slipped on the rug. Giosuè lifted a hand, a small, economical gesture that silenced the lawyer instantly. His gaze never left me. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice a low, perfectly controlled baritone that somehow made the room feel smaller. He didn't ask why I spoke, but what I said, demanding clarity over context. I knew this was the point of no return. I had to offer absolute proof instantly. Vague paranoia would get me shot. Scholarly detail might get me heard. "The dialect is flawless, Mr. Cocci," I stated, my voice steady, betraying none of the fear clawing at my throat. I lowered the tray, my hands now empty and visible. "The flaw is not in the translation. It is in the legal structure of the original Latin phrasing. The use of pratica standard di condotta aziendale in comune is not unifying language. It is indicting language." Salvatore laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. "Indicting? That is boilerplate language for common enterprise, a simple assurance of shared resources." "It is boilerplate for a RICO conviction, Salvatore," I corrected him, using his name and title deliberately. That specific phrase, when translated back to the legal Latin from which it was derived, mirrors the definitional language for pattern of racketeering activity, as established by the Second Circuit in U.S. v. Castellano, 1985. By signing, you are not unifying the families. You are legally confirming by your own signature the continuity element required by federal prosecutors to ensure a decades-long sentence for every capo at this table. The room snapped. The other capos who had been watching Giosuè suddenly looked at Salvatore, then at the document, then back at me. They were men of action, not law, but the word RICO was a universal language of existential threat in their world. Giosuè leaned back in his chair, the slight movement a controlled explosion. He glanced at the two security guards standing behind me. Without taking his eyes from mine, he issued 3 commands, rapid fire and icy. "Secure the document. Get Salvatore's cell phone and tablet. Waitress, step forward." The two young men who had been flanking the walls moved instantly. The first grabbed the charter off the table, rolling it tightly and placing it in a secure briefcase he slapped shut. The second moved on Salvatore, who started to sputter. "This is insane! Mr. Cocci, you can't listen to this!" "Silence," Giosuè ordered. His attention was solely on me. "You claim to possess knowledge of my enemy's legal strategy. Where did you acquire this knowledge, and why are you serving me wine?" This was the hardest truth I'd had to speak, the truth that exposed my flaw. I was an investigative journalist. I specialized in exposing coordinated legal and political corruption. 3 years ago, I put a corporate CEO in prison, and his partners decided I was next. I chose to disappear. I have a photographic memory for complex data, including the precise legal loopholes used by federal prosecutors. I became a ghost to survive. I broke my silence tonight because the trap you were about to walk into would have destroyed the structure that allows me and everyone here to remain hidden. Giosuè studied me, his gaze moving across my face, cataloging the intensity he saw in the image I knew I was projecting. He saw not a waitress, but a highly skilled operative, dangerous and specialized. He didn't look at my uniform. He looked at my mind. He gave a curt nod to his security chief. "Escort Salvatore and his colleague to the perimeter. They are done. The contract remains here." As the sputtering, protesting lawyer was marched out, the last of the outside light seemed to vanish. Giosuè stood up, finally moving. He was tall, formidable, and his controlled anger was palpable. He walked slowly around the table, stopping directly in front of me. "You saved me from a war, Michelle Wagner," he said, using my full name, cutting through the waitress facade. "But you have also revealed yourself to me. You are no longer invisible. You are an asset and a liability. I need to know everything, now." He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. "Sit down, Michelle. Let's discuss your new employment." I didn't hesitate. I slid into the chair Giosuè indicated, a massive, high-backed throne opposite his own, and instantly felt the weight of the move. Waitresses don't sit. Waitresses stand, serve, and disappear. But a journalist or a strategist? We sit, we negotiate, and we demand to be heard. I met his intense gaze across the dark mahogany table, no longer a ghost, but a player in his high-stakes game. "My name is Michelle Wagner," I confirmed, setting the record straight without apology. "I don't have a background in art history, but in counterintelligence and legal vulnerability analysis. My expertise is recognizing patterns and breaking codes. That phrase, pratica standard di condotta aziendale in comune, is the oldest code in the world, a lie disguised as cooperation." Giosuè leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He didn't interrupt. He listened with a predatory focus that commanded every synapse in my brain. "I need to understand your position," he finally said. "You endangered yourself, your invisibility, to save my position. Why? A waitress has no loyalty to the Cocci family." "A waitress has loyalty to her own survival," I countered immediately, throwing his ruthless logic back at him. "My past employers are powerful men who are still looking for me. They want me dead because of what I know about their corrupt legal networks. I've been hiding here, in the safest place I could find, because of your discipline. Your organization is a complex, ordered structure. If you sign that charter and are arrested under RICO, which you would have been guaranteed, that structure collapses." I let the word collapses hang in the air. The implosion would cause a power vacuum, a territory war, and a flood of federal activity. Security would break down. In that chaos, my enemies find me. If you stay free and in power, I stay hidden and alive. You didn't save my life tonight, Mr. Cocci, but I saved the structure that protects us both. His lips curved into the slightest of smiles, a chilling acknowledgement of my perfectly logical, utterly cold reasoning. He respected the transaction. "Very good, Michelle Wagner," he murmured. "You are not a coward, and you are not sentimental. These are qualities I value. But now that you have revealed your capabilities, your ghost life is truly over. You have intelligence that is critical to my immediate survival. I can't risk you walking out that door and being interrogated by my enemies, or worse, the FBI." He reached for the secure briefcase holding the foiled charter, his eyes still on mine. "You presented the problem and provided the solution. Now you must understand the terms of the acquisition. You belong to the problem now. I will guarantee your absolute safety. I will give you resources and cover that no amount of hiding could ever afford you. In return, your mind belongs to me." The tension was suffocating. I nodded once. "What is the role?" "The legal structure of this organization is about to undergo radical change," he said. "I am purging incompetence and clearly betrayal. I require a new advisor, not a consigliere. That position has too many old, weak ties. You will be my analyst and my shadow strategist. You will work under my direct authority, analyzing every legal document, every security vulnerability, every piece of information that crosses my desk. You will find the threats before they manifest." He paused, leaning closer, his voice dropping. "You will be my eyes in the darkness, the mind that sees the codes nobody else can. The money will be substantial, the protection absolute. Do we have an agreement?" It was a deal that traded my freedom for my life, my anonymity for my purpose. It was exactly what I needed. "I have 2 conditions," I stated. I saw a flicker of surprise, an appreciation in his eyes. "Name them." "First, my protection must extend to absolute secrecy regarding my location and identity. Nobody, not even your internal security, is to know my full background, only that I am a new consultant. My enemies are resourceful." "Agreed," Giosuè said instantly. "And the second? I need an immediate full forensic sweep of all Salvatore's communications and accounts. He didn't invent this legal trap. He was merely the delivery system. The person who conceived this plan is still out there, and they are brilliant. We need to find the source." Giosuè smiled again, this time a genuine, chilling flash of satisfaction. "An excellent strategic move. The first sign of a good partner is their desire to hunt. Consider it done." He pushed a small, secured black phone across the table toward me. "Welcome to the family, Michelle Wagner. We have work to do." As I picked up the phone, a heavy, cold feeling of finality settled over me. I was no longer running. I was fighting. And my entire isolated existence was now entirely dependent on the survival of Giosuè Cocci. The uniform was the first thing to go. I stripped off the black vest and the crisp white shirt in the compound staff locker room, dropping them into the laundry bin without ceremony. It felt like shedding old skin. The moment I put on my own clothes, black trousers, a dark, perfectly tailored blazer, I stopped being the invisible servant and became the visible target. The sudden sense of exposure was visceral, like having the soundproofing ripped from the walls of my life. Giosuè's people didn't call it an office. They called it the Sentry. It was a massive, high-tech surveillance room tucked deep within the La Corsa compound, guarded by men with cold eyes and serious hardware. My new workspace was a self-contained analyst station, bathed in the dim, cool glow of half a dozen monitors. It was the antithesis of my quiet, empty apartment, a nexus of information and power. I had traded the anonymity of the service hall for the absolute secrecy of the command center. My first 3 days blurred into a marathon of data analysis. I was handed the entire trove of Salvatore's digital life: emails, encrypted texts, legal drafts, and financial routing information. My task was to trace the RICO trap back to its source, the architect who had conceived such a brilliant, devastating legal mechanism. Giosuè was focused and demanding. He expected answers, not excuses, and his presence was a constant, intense pressure in the room. What I found was frustratingly clean. Salvatore was a mule. The documents were delivered via secure, untraceable shell companies that terminated in Geneva. The legal language came from a source so deeply layered in legal firms and offshore trusts that tracing it directly felt like chasing smoke. The money trail goes cold at a series of dead drops, Mr. Cocci, I reported on the fourth morning, circling an encrypted IP address on a monitor. The creator of the RICO clause is not interested in cash. They are interested in the result, your arrest. This was never a scam. It was a political execution. Giosuè stood over my station, watching the data flow across the screens. The threat is still external, then? No, I said, leaning back, the paranoia that had saved my life kicking in. The threat is worse than external. The threat is targeted. This clause was too perfect. It didn't just target any mob boss. It targeted you. It targeted your unification effort and your specific history with the other families. This whole exercise was a pre-attack reconnaissance designed to do two things: force you to expose your vulnerability and test your current internal security and intelligence. I looked up at him, the full implication clicking into place. The charter wasn't just a trap, it was a map. Someone close to you gave the architect all the precise internal details necessary to build a trap this specific. The external lure was only set to ensnare an internal asset. He absorbed this without a flicker. You are suggesting there is a mole. I am suggesting there is a highly placed operative who has been feeding intelligence for months, possibly years, I corrected. They are patient, sophisticated, and still operating within the compound, monitoring our reaction to the failed signing. If we can't find the source through Salvatore's outgoing comms, we have to find them through your incoming security feeds. My focus immediately shifted from dead-end legal trails to the living, breathing heart of the compound's defense systems. I started pulling up network logs, server maintenance schedules, and surveillance video encryption keys. I felt a surge of familiar energy. This was my territory. I understood systems designed to hide, and I understood the minute, almost invisible flaws they inevitably contained. I spent the next 2 days immersed in the system architecture, specifically the state-of-the-art security grid that monitored all electronic communication and internal movements within the compound. The system was new, implemented just 6 months ago, and built by a highly recommended private firm. The name of the installer struck me, Luca Cocci, Giosuè's younger estranged brother. I isolated the system's external routing capabilities, searching for any unauthorized handshake or backdoor access. The system was flawlessly designed, the encryption keys rotating exactly as scheduled, the firewall impenetrable. It was too good. Nothing is this perfect unless it's designed to look perfect. I zoomed in on the daily maintenance log for the past 6 months, cross-referencing file sizes. One file stood out. A daily encrypted packet of data, ostensibly part of a standard diagnostic report, being routed to a benign external server. The file was only 144 KB, too small for a video feed, too consistent to be random server noise. I spent a painstaking 24 hours cracking the encryption. When the data finally decompressed on my screen, I felt a familiar, chilling dread settle over me. It wasn't surveillance footage. It wasn't financial data. It was metadata. Detailed chronological logs of all personnel entering the sanctum, recording their ID, the exact time they disabled their personal devices, and the length of their stay. It was a precise map of every sensitive meeting Giosuè had conducted in the last 6 months, being quietly funneled out of the secure compound daily. And the only person with the access and knowledge to create a file this small, this specific, and route it through a seemingly flawless system was the man who oversaw the security, or his direct associate. The realization was stark and sickening. The mole was not a hired hand or a distant enemy. He was someone Giosuè trusted implicitly, someone close enough to be inside the wire. I didn't need to check the timestamp of the last successful transmission. I knew. I sat back, the dark monitors reflecting the chilling truth in my eyes. The threat was internal, active, and right here. Giosuè's reaction to my discovery, the 144 KB metadata packet, was unsettlingly calm. He didn't erupt. He simply became heavier, denser, like iron compressing under immense pressure. "Luca," he said, the name dropping into the silence of the sentry like a stone into a deep well. "My brother, Luca. He installed the new security grid 6 months ago. He swore it was impenetrable." I zoomed in on the daily transmission record, laying out the timeline. The transmission began immediately after installation. Luca is either compromised or he is the operative. I leaned toward the latter. "The system is too perfect, Mr. Cocci. Every defense is solid, every firewall impenetrable. It's designed to make an analyst look everywhere but at the core. Only the architect of a flawless system knows how to create a flaw that looks like background noise." I explained my theory, pointing to the meticulously coded route the metadata took, an external server masquerading as a diagnostic upload. The RICO trap was the alarm bell. It was set off to see who would stop it and how. Now that you've foiled it, the operative will accelerate their plan. This metadata isn't random. It's a precise map of your most sensitive meetings, a record of every critical decision. It's what the FBI needs to build their case on a daily basis. They don't even need to plan a bug anymore. You're giving them the login times. Giosuè finally moved, pushing away from my station. He walked to the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his tailor-made suit amplifying the tension in his shoulders. Luca is not a soldier. He's an engineer. He always resented the business, preferring circuits to strategy, but he is family. "Sentiment is what they are counting on," I stated plainly, refusing to soften the intelligence for his benefit. "The mole is someone you trust so implicitly that you never authorized a security audit of his work. Who else had access to this level of internal planning besides Luca and the lawyer who delivered the charter?" Giosuè slowly turned, his dark eyes fixed on the timeline display. "My consigliere," he said, his voice flat. "Silvio Rossi. He managed the budget for the new security system. He vetted Luca's firm and signed off on the specs. Silvio Rossi, the steel-gray hair, the older man in Giosuè's entourage. I hadn't paid him much mind before. He seemed a fixture, a trusted shadow, but his role in the security overhaul paired with his access to Giosuè's schedule created a damning silhouette. If the data is moving externally, I reasoned, the operative needs 3 things: access to the security logs, a way to decrypt the meeting details, and a line out. The person who has the most sensitive information, your itinerary, your strategy, your internal conflicts, is your chief advisor. The possibility of his most trusted counsel being the betrayer hit Giosuè harder than the thought of his brother. His expression hardened into a look of cold, calculating certainty. The iron had been fully compressed. "We need proof, Michelle," he said. "Solid proof. Not just system logs. If I move on Silvio, I move on a decades-old alliance. The consequences for being wrong would be catastrophic." "I agree," I replied, "but we don't have time for a slow audit. The source is active. We need to set a trap of our own, one designed to flush out the mole and confirm his identity without ever compromising your position. We must give him a reason to take immediate, kinetic action." I pitched him the plan. It was brazen, relying on the mole's arrogance and the assumption that he would monitor Giosuè's reaction to the failed RICO attempt. "We leak a document," I explained, pulling up a fake legal memo on a clean screen. "We will draft a memo detailing a massive, preemptive countersuit against the very legal firms that created the RICO trap. This memo must be highly sensitive and accessible only to you, Silvio, and me. The countersuit would dismantle the entire legal network they spent months building. If Silvio is the mole, he must notify the external architect immediately, forcing them to destroy the legal trail. Giosuè listened, his eyes tracking the logic. And the leak method? We don't leak it digitally. That's too easy to trace. You will review it in your personal study tonight. You will make a show of burning the notes, a signal that the plan is being canceled, but you will ensure one single printout of the memo is left in the briefcase that Silvio always carries. A careless mistake only a trusted confidant would be privy to. Giosuè nodded slowly. And if Silvio takes the bait and destroys the evidence, we confirm his betrayal. No, I corrected, a glint of the old journalist's hunger in my eyes. If Silvio takes the bait, he confirms his betrayal and confirms he has an operative on the outside ready to act. We need to trace that action. The moment he leaves the compound, we follow the reaction of the external enemy. We force them to expose themselves through violence. Giosuè stared at me, a mix of admiration and dark recognition in his gaze. You think like a predator, Michelle Wagner. I was a journalist, I reminded him. We are masters of the trap. The plan relied on the mole's arrogance, the conviction that they were the smartest person in the room, untouchable, and 3 steps ahead. It was an arrogance I, as a former operative, knew intimately, and it was always the flaw that brought the brilliant down. I worked with Giosuè in the Sentry for the next 12 hours, drafting the countersuit memo. It was a masterclass in fictional legal strategy, highly specific, technically sound, and completely fabricated. It detailed a complex, multi-jurisdictional suit that, if initiated, would effectively freeze and dismantle the offshore legal network that had orchestrated the RICO trap. It was the absolute worst-case scenario for the external architect. The trick wasn't the document itself, but the delivery. We agreed that the leak had to appear accidental, something only the most trusted inner circle would be privy to. Tonight, you and Silvio will meet in your private study, not the sanctum, I instructed, standing over Giosuè as he signed the cover sheet of the fake memo. You will discuss the plan to implement this countersuit, emphasizing the immediacy, that we are striking before they can move again. After he leaves, you will visibly, but imperfectly, attempt to destroy the hard copies in the fireplace. Giosuè watched me closely. And the bait? The bait is his briefcase, I confirmed, pointing to Silvio's expensive leather portfolio, which he never left unattended. You will leave 1 page. The executive summary detailing the crucial legal jurisdictions, partially exposed on the table, then distract him with a final drink. He will pocket it, assuming he found a priceless piece of intelligence that was almost destroyed. The operation began at 10 p.m. I moved from the Sentry to a concealed surveillance nest built into the roofline overlooking Giosuè's private study. I had my gear, a thermal scanner, a directional audio pickup, and a secure comms line back to a silent monitoring team inside the compound. I was a ghost again, but this time the camouflage was intentional. I watched through the thermal optics as Silvio and Giosuè met. The meeting was tense. Giosuè played his part flawlessly, his anger at the RICO attempt translating into cold, decisive action against the external threat. Silvio listened, his customary calm professionalism visible even through the infrared haze. The moment came when Giosuè stood, announcing the plan was too risky and they should wait, and then made a show of tossing the thick file into the fireplace, lighting a match. He then went to pour Silvio a digestivo. Silvio moved. He didn't rush, which was a mark of his discipline. He simply stepped to the table, and while Giosuè's back was turned, his hand, practiced and swift, palmed the exposed summary page. He folded it once, perfectly, and slid it into an inner pocket of his coat before Giosuè returned. Confirmation. He took the bait. The internal breach was confirmed. Now we wait for the domino to fall, I murmured into the comms line. Silvio departed exactly 45 minutes later, driven by his personal security detail. My team followed his vehicle's GPS remotely. For the first 2 hours, Nothing. Silvio drove to his private residence outside the city, seemingly returning to a normal routine. Then, at 2:37 a.m., the reaction occurred. Not from Silvio's location, but 400 miles away in Washington, D.C. My monitoring team flagged an immediate, frantic sequence of activity originating from the encrypted networks of the legal firm listed on the fake countersuit memo. Files were being scrubbed, server logs were being purged, and most damningly, a secure courier was dispatched carrying a physical package marked urgent, red file, from the Washington, D.C. firm, directed to an international departure terminal. The confirmation was absolute. Silvio had transmitted the intel. The speed and specificity of the counter-reaction proved two things. Silvio was the mole, and the external architect was waiting on his signal. I returned to the sentry and found Giosuè waiting, his hands steepled under his chin. I laid out the evidence, the timeline of the leak, the immediate DC data purge, and the courier's hasty dispatch. Silvio did not betray you for money, I explained, pointing to the DC firm's internal protocols. He betrayed you for protection. He secured a deal with the feds by offering them your head, and this countersuit memo forced the feds' hand. They ordered the DC firm to sanitize everything before we could sue them. Only Silvio could have caused this specific reaction. Giosuè looked at the evidence, his expression a mask of cold devastation. 25 years, he finally said, his voice quiet. I trusted his judgment above all others, and he was building my RICO case. He is the delivery man, Giosuè, I stated, using his first name again, pushing past his pain. But he is still just the wire. The external threat is now aware that you know the trap was set. They know that you have intelligence. They are panicked, and they are moving to destroy their trail. They will not stop with legal maneuvers. They will initiate kinetic action to neutralize the threat, which is now both of us. I pulled up a map of the city. The courier's movement is our one chance. We need to follow that red file. We force the confrontation, and we eliminate the external architect. Giosuè rose, his body language shifting from the disciplined boss to the lethal predator. His eyes were cold, burning with betrayal. Get your gear, Michelle. We don't send a team to follow a betrayal this deep. We go ourselves. Giosuè's private garage was less a parking space and more a highly pressurized armory. Within 15 minutes of confirming Silvio's betrayal, we were moving. I was wearing a discreet earpiece and carrying a small encrypted tablet mirroring the city's traffic grid. Giosuè, in a dark wool coat, didn't bother with a weapon. His bodyguard, Marco, a silent, hulking shadow, carried the necessary ordnance. We were in a black, custom-armored Mercedes, S-Class, the type of car that could withstand a small, improvised explosive device. The courier is en route to JFK, I confirmed, tracking the red courier van's GPS via the DC firm's internal manifest I had cracked. They're taking the Belt Parkway. If the external architect wants to retrieve that red file before it leaves the country, this is their last window. The architect won't retrieve it personally, Giosuè said, his voice flat with cold rage. They'll send interceptors. The moment that file stops moving, they'll know we're onto them, and they'll try to silence us. We are bait, Michelle. We are armed bait, I corrected, my focus entirely on the digital map. The route was tight, choked with late-night construction zones, perfect for a staged accident or a blockade. The target won't be the courier. The target will be you. They need to ensure the man who countersued and his analyst disappear before any evidence leaves the country. We followed the courier van from a distance, staying 2 lanes over and a mile back. As the van approached a dark stretch of the Belt Parkway near the Jamaica Bay wetlands, the screen in my hand flared red. "Stop! Now!" I commanded. There's a sudden coordinated blockage ahead. 2 municipal trucks have stopped simultaneously, flanking the road. It's an ambush point. Giosuè immediately spoke into his comms. "Marco, pull over. Turn off the lights." Marco didn't question it. He expertly maneuvered the massive car onto the shoulder under the deep shadow of an overpass. We killed the headlights and settled into the stillness, watching the red dot of the courier van crawl toward the designated kill zone. Suddenly, a massive black SUV, an untraceable heavy-duty vehicle, slammed into the back of the courier van. The explosion of glass and crumpling metal was audible even from our distance. 2 armed men immediately exited the SUV, moving toward the van. "The architect is not here," Giosuè murmured, his jaw tight. "These are contractors. They only want the file." But before the contractors could reach the van, the 2 municipal trucks flanking the road roared to life. Instead of aiding the crash victims, they repositioned, creating an impenetrable metal barrier. A stream of armed figures spilled out of the back of the trucks, not federal agents but highly skilled mercenaries wearing tactical gear. They ignored the courier and immediately turned their attention toward our assumed location. "Wrong," I whispered, realizing the depth of the deception. "Silvio gave them our surveillance frequency. They know where to look. They're not after the file. They're after the leak source." The mercenaries opened fire, not at the van, but spraying the wooded embankment and the shadows beneath the overpass, exactly where Giosuè would logically stop. They were looking for the black S-Class. The bullets chewed into the dirt and concrete near our location. "Marco, drive," Giosuè ordered. "Not forward, back." Marco hit the accelerator, reversing the armored car at speed. Tires. Screaming as he pulled us out of the line of fire. The mercenaries saw the movement and changed targets. It became a high-speed, desperate chase on the dark, winding parkway. The mercenary trucks, heavy and fast, pursued us while their colleagues from the initial SUV tried to outflank us. Giosuè and Marco were professionals, weaving the armored Mercedes through the narrow gaps, but the mercenaries were coordinated. "They're using a coordinated jammer," I shouted, watching my digital map dissolve into static. "We're blind. They're forcing us toward the exit ramp at Bay Parkway." "That ramp is a bottleneck," Giosuè snarled. "They're trying to contain us." As we hit the ramp, the first mercenary truck managed to pull alongside us. A figure leaned out the window, leveling a powerful automatic weapon at Giosuè's side of the car. The sound of the machine gun was deafening against the armored glass, but the vehicle held. The car was hit multiple times, the force rattling us violently. "Marco, get us off the road!" Giosuè yelled. I saw the opportunity. A tiny, overgrown service road beneath the elevated subway line, an impossible turn in the dark. "Take the access road now," I screamed. "It leads to the subway maintenance yard. We can lose them in the tracks." Marco wrenched the wheel. We burst through a chain-link fence and plunged onto the rough, debris-strewn path. The sudden violent shift in terrain threw me forward. Giosuè, without hesitation, reached out and shoved me back against the seat with brutal force, shielding my head with his body as the car shuddered. "Stay down," he commanded, his breath hot against my ear. The betrayal was over. We were in survival mode, a single desperate unit. The mercenary truck, unable to handle the turn, smashed into a concrete pillar 50 feet behind us. We had bought seconds, maybe a minute. We were trapped in a dark, dead-end maintenance yard, surrounded by the shadows of the elevated subway structure. The external architect knew we were alive and cornered. The threat had escalated from a signed document to a desperate fight for our lives. The air in the maintenance yard was heavy with the smell of wet gravel, diesel fumes, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. The armored S-Class was wedged between a pile of rusted track ties and a concrete support column for the elevated subway, effectively trapped. The mercenary truck that had been pursuing us was smashed 50 feet back, but the other vehicle, the black SUV that initiated the ambush, had navigated the chaos and was now idling silently at the entrance to the maintenance road. "They know we're here," Giosuè stated, his voice a low, grim rumble as he reached for the small, concealed weapons locker. Marco was already outside the car, using the door as cover, his weapon trained on the SUV. "They won't come in hot," I muttered, my journalist's mind still analyzing the pattern. "They need confirmation you're dead, or they need the red file intel. They're professionals. They'll use suppressors and containment tactics. "You analyze, Marco executes," Giosuè ordered. He handed me a small, heavy pistol. "Hold this. If they breach the car, aim for the throat. Don't hesitate." I accepted the weapon. It felt cold, deadly, and utterly real. Far more real than any legal memo or encrypted file. The next moments were a brutal symphony of shadows and silenced gunfire. The doors of the black SUV opened and 4 figures emerged, moving with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. They bypassed Marco's location and moved to flank the perimeter, checking beneath the subway girders and behind the parked maintenance carts. They were hunting us like game. Marco opened fire, a short, controlled burst that dropped 1 mercenary instantly. The remaining 3 returned fire, not at Marco, but riddling the armored tires of the S-Class, ensuring we couldn't drive out. "Tires are gone!" Marco yelled over the sound of impact. "We fight here!" Giosuè pushed his door open, a second weapon in his hand. He laid down, suppressing fire, forcing the mercenaries to take cover behind a mountain of salt bags. The darkness, the echoes, and the maze of rusted metal created a desperate, chaotic close-quarters fight. I used my moment of relative cover to analyze the terrain. The maintenance yard was a dead end, except for one thing: a crumbling, gated access stairwell leading up to the subway platform above us. It was a risk, but it was our only exit. "Giosuè, up! The stairwell. It connects to the Bay Parkway station platform. It's the only way out," I shouted, pointing through the window toward the skeletal iron structure. He took a quick glance. "Marco, suppressive fire, we're moving up." Marco created a screen of gunfire, allowing Giosuè and me to sprint toward the stairs. We were halfway up the rusted iron steps when the 2 remaining mercenaries, realizing their containment had failed, converged on the base of the stairwell. "They're coming!" I yelled, pulling on Giosuè's coat sleeve. Suddenly, a loud metallic click echoed from the base of the stairs. One of the mercenaries tossed a flashbang grenade, not to kill, but to incapacitate and blind us. Giosuè spun around. He didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. With a grunt of effort, he threw his body across mine, shoving my head deep into his shoulder, shielding me from the blinding light and deafening concussion. The explosion was immediate and violent. A white-hot flash filled my vision, and the deafening crack felt like it tore the air in 2. Shrapnel from the concrete steps ripped into the air. When the ringing finally started to subside, I realized I was lying on the steps, my ears screaming, my body untouched. Giosuè lay heavy on top of me, his weight crushing. "Giosuè!" I pushed him off, adrenaline overriding all sense of fear. He gasped, a terrible guttural sound, and rolled onto his back. Blood was blooming instantly across the shoulder and upper back of his wool coat, dark and spreading fast. A jagged piece of shrapnel had torn through his left side, and he was losing blood rapidly. His face was pale, drawn tight with pain he refused to voice. "Go," he ground out, pushing the keys of the armored car toward me. He pointed back toward the stairwell base where Marco was still fighting. "Marco will cover the rear. Get the car started. There is an emergency exit on the north wall. A maintenance tunnel. Go!" I grabbed the keys. My training took over, silencing the panic. There was no time for guilt, no time for fear, only efficiency. He had sacrificed his safety for my own, transforming the transaction into a life-or-death bond. I was no longer an analyst. I was a field medic and a getaway driver. I scrambled back down the steps, bypassing Marco, who was pinned down behind a dumpster. "I need the car," I shouted to him. "Tunnel exit is blocked by a chain." Marco yelled back, reloading his weapon. "You'll have to ram it." I ripped open the S-Class door, shoving Giosuè's heavy body back into the passenger seat. I didn't care about his armor, only that he was still breathing. I slammed the door shut, shoved the keys into the ignition, and hit the pedal. The armored car roared to life, the tires ruined, but the engine massive. I gripped the wheel, aiming for the rusted metal gate Marco had mentioned. I had no idea if the tunnel was a decoy or a path to freedom. With a crash of mangled metal and a shower of sparks, the S-Class tore through the chained gate and into the darkness of the maintenance tunnel. Behind me, I could hear Marco's final, defiant bursts of gunfire echoing through the yard as he held the line, sacrificing his own escape for ours. I drove blindly into the tunnel, my hands shaking on the wheel, Giosuè bleeding heavily next to me. The betrayal was confirmed, the confrontation was deadly, and we were now alone, bonded by blood, fear, and a shared enemy. I drove the armored Mercedes deeper into the black maintenance tunnel, the car complaining bitterly as ruined tires fought against rough concrete. The metallic scraping of the side panels against the tunnel walls was deafening. My priority was simple. Giosuè had to live. I pulled the car to a stop in a small, recessed alcove, far enough from the entrance that the echoes of Marco's final stand faded into silence. The silence now was worse. It was thick with blood and betrayal. Giosuè was slumped against the passenger door, his face pale beneath the grime and sweat. His expensive wool coat was now a sodden bandage, soaked through with blood from the shrapnel wound in his shoulder. "The radio," he gasped, his voice thin but still commanding. "Open the trunk. Medical kit." I found the small, comprehensive field kit, ripping it open. My hands, trained to handle fine-grained data and surveillance wire, now moved with frantic, clinical efficiency. I stabilized his neck, cut away the ruined fabric, and found the deep, jagged wound. It wasn't a clean shot, but a shrapnel tear, nasty but survivable if I could stop the hemorrhage. "This is going to hurt," I warned, injecting a powerful coagulant into the muscle near the wound. He didn't flinch. Instead, he watched me, his dark eyes never leaving mine. "You move like a soldier," he noted, his voice strained. "More than a journalist." "I learned field trauma in Beirut, embedded with a PMC," I replied, pressing a gauze pack hard against the wound. "Survival is a versatile skill." For the next half hour, I was his nurse, his strategist, and his lifeline. I cleaned the wound, stitched the laceration with the kit's suture supplies, and secured a pressure bandage. The physical intimacy was unavoidable, and in the claustrophobic darkness, it stripped away the masks we both wore. I was no longer the brilliant analyst, and he was no longer the untouchable boss. We were two people who had just chosen each other's lives over our own safety. When the blood flow stabilized, Giosuè took a shuddering breath. "The courier," he rasped. "The DC firm. The red file." "The ambush was immediate proof, Giosuè," I said, my voice low and fierce. "Silvio was the mole. He used his position to sell you to the external network. That network hired the mercenaries. They targeted you to stop the countersuit, and they sent the red file to confirm their insurance policy against your organization. We have what we need." I used the emergency satellite phone from the kit to contact Giosuè's most trusted, non-internal asset, a retired tactical consultant. I gave him cryptic instructions. Secure the maintenance tunnel, extract Marco, and most importantly, intercept the courier van carrying the red file. 6 weeks later, the world had been violently and irrevocably reset. Giosuè recovered swiftly, though his shoulder would always carry the scar, a physical testament to his sacrifice. The red file, retrieved successfully, contained a massive digital dump of all the communication between Silvio, the DC legal firm, and the true architect of the RICO trap, a rival faction leader who was coordinating the FBI's infiltration. The betrayal was exposed, the network dismantled, and the rival faction leader neutralized without a shot fired in the open. The political assassination plot had been thwarted, proving that Giosuè's discipline and my unique intellect were an unstoppable pairing. I was no longer the shadow strategist. The title of consigliere, once held by the traitor Silvio, was offered to me. It wasn't just a title, it was a commitment. "You will be the face of our intelligence, the strength of our strategy, and the foundation of our defense," Giosuè told me in the newly refitted sanctum. Your anonymity is guaranteed by my protection, and your purpose is fulfilled by my organization. I need your mind, Michelle." I accepted. The story of Michelle Wagner, the runaway journalist, was officially over. I was now the integral part of the structure I had once sought to expose, using my genius to protect the empire that protected me. That night, standing in his private apartment overlooking the city, a view I shared as his equal, his indispensable partner, Giosuè closed the distance between us. His eyes, once hard and assessing, now held a deep, unshakable trust, forged in blood and fire. He touched the scar on his shoulder, then traced the clean, unbroken line of my jaw. "You saved my life, Michelle," he murmured. "But you saved more than that. You saved the one thing I was missing, a partner who sees the truth, not the facade." Our shared purpose had blossomed into an intense, quiet, and absolutely certain connection. We had found in each other a dangerous kind of reconciliation. I utilized my suppressed intellect, and he found a fierce, loyal love that understood the lethal necessities of his world. I had started the story, isolated, and running. I ended it seen, valued, and loved, finally anchored to the powerful structure I was born to analyze and now sworn to protect. The empire had been saved, and so had I. You just experienced a story about courage, betrayal, and the kind of high-stakes trust that can only be forged in blood. Michelle started her journey isolated and running. She ended it as the indispensable strategist at the center of power. Giosuè started alone and ended up finding the one partner whose mind was his greatest weapon. What was your favorite moment in their transformation? Did you predict who the mole was before Chapter 6? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If this story, blending espionage, dark romance, and tactical brilliance, resonated with you, show your support. Like this story to help others discover the thrill of the silent war. Subscribe for more epic narratives where intelligence is the ultimate weapon. Share this with a friend who loves political thrillers and fierce heroines. Let's build a community of readers who appreciate stories where loyalty and lethal precision make the perfect combination. See you in the comments.